What is going on, people? Good to have you back on board. Another episode of Unfiltered coming your way right here, right now. This will officially go down in the scorecard as episode number 313. You can jump on board 24/7, 365. It is easy. Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcasts. You can jump onto Twitter or X if you want to call it that, at Casey Stern. Give me a follow, then get up into the bio, and you can follow through to the Instagram, Unfiltered with Casey Stern, and my YouTube channel, which also is Unfiltered with Casey Stern. And there on the YouTube channel, you can get not only Unfiltered, but Believe in Mets, including episodes with Jim Duquette and with John Gibbons. And you can get the new NBA Coast to Coast, 2 episodes deep in that. And if you follow on Apple, Spotify, and everywhere you get your podcasts, you subscribe to Unfiltered, you'll get all 3 podcasts under that one umbrella. Lot to get to today. Predominantly, and this may be short, wanted to get into, before we move on to the second half in baseball, this incredulous, disgusting, pathetic, embarrassing, torturous, nauseating experience we all had watching the All-Star Game because of these uniforms. And to have to even take time to talk about this is insanity, but we have to. Also want to delve into and dip into and get your thoughts and comments on the ESPN top 100 athletes of the 21st century, and, kind of delve into just a couple of my thoughts on that as well. These lists are what they are. It's apples and oranges, but I'm curious what your take is on that. So we'll get into a couple of things today. Always, whatever day it is, we're presented by our good friends at Bet Online. They are the world's most trusted betting platform, your number one source for all of your online sports betting. Right now, you can get a 50% free bet of up to $250 on your first deposit to bet on anything from the upcoming Olympics to baseball to Formula One. Bet Online's got it all. They also have all the stats, every matchup, live odds, and spreads. All of the games are being played. Then when it's over, head over to the online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker, unwind with over 150 slot games. Get over the website now. Get in on the action. Again, promo code is BELIEVE, BLEAV. You'll get a 50% free bet credit up to a deposit of $250. It's Bet Online. The game starts here, and I start here. I have never really been a huge fan of anybody worrying about minutia with the All-Star Game. The idea that it counted way back when was just about as stupid as anything ever, and was, to me, the worst decision that ever was attached to Bud Selig as commissioner of Major League Baseball. Because it already is a better event than the Pro Bowl, which now is debunked. It already is a better event than the NHL All-Star Game, although I like the creativity with the 3-on-3 and what they've done. And don't even get into the NBA All-Star Game, which is a damn shame and an utter joke. It's already better. And that's in large part because there's a lot of one-on-one in an All-Star Game. And I'm not going to give it up to you as a pitcher or a hitter. That's my spot. That's my chance. That's my spotlight to showcase my abilities one-on-one, not something you see. Hello, defense. There's none of it on the NBA side in the All-Star Game, for example. So I don't need to make it count. And if you're going to have one per team, for me, have the rosters be as big as you want and let everybody in there and let everybody get an at-bat and do it that way. But don't sacrifice guys who should be all-stars for an all-star that has to be there. For example, I remember there have been guys with ERAs north of 5 on some bad teams. And won't call anybody out, although I do remember some. But I try not to sit there and delve too much into worrying about the X's and O's of an all-star game. You get excited about the Paul Skeens opportunity. You get excited about the pomp and circumstance of getting everybody introduced and towing the line and the excitement of that. That is what it's all about. I don't care about delving much deeper. But this disgrace with the jerseys was so awful that it has overtaken Skeens or Ohtani or Teoscar Hernandez from the Home Run Derby, or whatever you want to put into. I can't say the Futures game because nobody got to watch it because it was while games were being played. But Major League Baseball has screwed up anything and everything that they possibly could for seemingly forever, including the fiasco with Nike and Fanatics and the jerseys this season. with the see-through pants, and with all of the issues that came into the year. So how is it possible on a year where jerseys and uniforms and issues, oh my, were already prevalent in Major League Baseball, that we could have a fiasco like we just had at the All-Star Game, the Midsummer Classic? It looked like a bunch of kids went into a sleepaway camp area where they create tie-dye, threw a bunch of colors and some really cheaply made fabric into some kind of a machine, put it in the water, whatever you do. I'm no artist. And then all of a sudden it came out and they said, wear this garbage because it was garbage. Forget an eyesore. Can you imagine going back if you're a Pittsburgh Pirate fan and having to now forever go watch highlights of this performance in what hopefully, knock on wood, is a healthy and wonderful career for Paul Skeens, and watching it in this? They're lining up players and we don't even know what teams they play for. The whole point of one per team is that you're sitting there and whatever, and I don't want to pick out any city, but whoever it is, because they're, look, in the past, it's been teams like the Royals. They're good now, right? So it doesn't matter. But whoever it might be, you're sitting there, you're a fan of a team, and you're saying, that's my guy. And that's what was great about watching all the uniforms represented. And for me, if you want to at the home run derby wear this crap, that's fine. But to sit there during the game, that's the whole point when they toe that line. Look, there's my Texas Ranger. There's my Kansas City Royal. There's my New York Met. There's my Boston Red Sox, or whomever it might be. If you only have one, my Washington Nationals, C.J. Abrams, or whoever, if you have multiples, as even some of the teams I just mentioned did. But that's, as a kid, that's what you watch. It's like you get excited for that introduction. You get excited for when they get, oh, they're coming in the game for that at-bat, and they're wearing your colors. What the hell colors were those? An absolute disgrace to the sport, for the players, and for the fans. I'm watching people line up and seeing, video clips on YouTube and elsewhere, and I got to look and I got to recognize a beard. I got to recognize a face. Now, it's not like football, trying to pick out an offensive lineman who's wearing a helmet. But I got to execute the facial recognition software to figure out who the hell is even in front of me, because I can't even find the logo on the hat to figure out what team you play for, and I shouldn't have to do that. No sport has been worse than Major League Baseball at marketing. None. The pits, they are the worst. They've always been that way. Like when we had to have this, let's have 3 days where everybody can wear nicknames on the back in some August series nobody's paying attention to in the middle of a long season, because that's how we'll placate the players and say, okay, well, now you can go be individuals, right? Don't worry, you could be individuals now. Here's some nicknames, and then we'll tell you we can't even allow you to wear some of the nicknames on the back because they're too edgy or racy or whatever. Rich Hill, for example. The idea of the way baseball has completely screwed this thing up in terms of marketing is, look, we already know that story. But this is, even for them, even for Major League Baseball, who has had so many mistakes in terms of marketing over the years, who has had so many issues in terms of the inept nature of how they handle their players and athletes. In a season where you had already jersey and uniforms issues, even for that league, even for this sport, an embarrassment. Off the charts, disgusting. To watch players not know who they play for, to have to sit there and watch them. And it's one thing. You don't want to have them wear the jerseys of their own team, which to me makes no sense. That's one thing. But can we make these jerseys look good? You got people creating jerseys on MLB The Show, 7 years old right now, sitting there in the living room, on the floor, making better jerseys than I just watched in the All-Star Game. And that is a joke. What an absolute travesty. I'd say they should be ashamed of themselves, but clearly, based on track record, they won't be. Curious your thoughts, your takes. Apple, Spotify, everywhere you get your podcasts. If you're listening there to Unfiltered, then get me on the comments there or shoot me a DM. Get me a note on Twitter or X, if you will, at Casey Stern. Get over to the YouTube channel. Please like, subscribe, watch all the videos. Unfiltered with Casey Stern. You can easily converse with me there. I don't want to say all, but almost all the comments. I will go ahead, reply, get into conversations with you about all that stuff. But what a joke. Curious your thoughts. Just quickly on this ESPN list, when you put out a list like this, it's like the Hall of Fame, right? In certain ways, like what are the qualifications? Like, how should I be looking at this? Am I looking at amount of numbers over a period of time? Am I looking at the height of when you were great? In this case, am I looking at, okay, well, it's since 2000. So even if you were great before then, it's what numbers and what kind of, efforts and performance and accolades and records did you get since that time period? Right. But when ESPN's putting together these top 100 pro athletes, and I want to read because that's the title, right, of the since 2000 of the 21st century, right? Well, what does that mean? Because if we're talking athletes, right, and we're looking at are we talking about, let's not to get, with the minutia again, semantics, but if we're talking about physically what kind of athletes they are, because if that's the case, then yeah, Michael Phelps deserves to be number one. And if that's the case, look, Albert Pujols, who I absolutely love, and I couldn't believe some of the people who were ahead of him. And I wrote down like a couple of notes. I mean, some of these are crazy, but if we're looking at like athletes, yeah, there were better athletes who were behind him that were soccer players that should have been ahead of Albert Pujols, right? And then, if that case, Mike Trout shouldn't be at 30. He should be bumped up. Are we looking at just purely athletics? Are we looking at performance? How are we basing the sports against each other? And the answer is these lists are great in a way because they create debate and argument, because there is no way to sit there and cycle down to exactly how one compares to the other. It just is not, you can't do it, right? And that's part of the fun, I guess, if you consider it that in these lists. But some of this is crazy. Now, look, it seemed like, and I'm a believer that Serena Williams is the best tennis player that has ever lived. All right. So I got no problem with, you want to talk about putting her at number one, and she ends up at number two behind Michael Phelps. If you haven't seen this list, it's Phelps at one, Serena at two, Lionel Messi at three, LeBron at four, Brady at five. I'm not going to read them all. I'll get into a couple. But clearly, it seemed like they made a point, and I don't know if this is some Excel spreadsheet, and then they went and they did the calculations, or who did what, because really, we're not seeing how the bread is buttered, okay, how the sauce is made with all this. But it seemed like they made a point to stay outside of the major four sports when you're putting Phelps, Serena Williams, and Messi ahead of LeBron and Brady, and maybe to make a point and say we are not just hyper-focused on the four major sports, maybe to make a point of we're staying international with the soccer or football, if you will, with Messi. I don't know. And certainly you can't go against his athleticism, performance, popularity, or any of that. But if you ask most people to make a list and they're putting together their best athletes since 2000, yeah, LeBron and Brady probably going to sit there at 1 and 2 in some order. And it's hard to argue against it when you think of the success that those two guys had, the amount of championships and finals appearances and Super Bowl appearances and accolades and records and Hall of Fame and best ever and all of that. I mean, LeBron, arguably the best that's ever lived in basketball. Tom Brady, the best quarterback that has ever lived in football, right? So is Michael Phelps ahead of them if you're sitting there and you're saying to yourself, well, I'm not looking at athlete, unless you're a swimmer, and no disrespect. But I watched all of those performances with Michael Phelps. I was all into it with the Olympics, but you're not putting him ahead of those two. I'm curious your take on that. Would you have put LeBron and or Brady ahead of Phillips, Serena, Messi? Let me know. Twitter, X, at Casey Stern, comments, YouTube, Unfiltered with Casey Stern, Instagram, same title. Couple of things stood out to me. I love Kevin Garnett. I had the pleasure of getting to work with him a few times. Was on his show a couple of times, Area 21 that he did. That was on TNT. And he's a fun and terrific dude. Okay. He can't be ahead of Albert Pujols. Now, is he a better athlete than Albert Pujols? Maybe he's a better athlete than Albert Pujols. Is that what this is? But he wasn't a better NBA player than Albert Pujols was a baseball player. Sorry. First 10 years of Albert Pujols' career, which we're in the time period we're talking about, are as good a 10 years of any hitter that has ever lived. And by the way, don't at me. Go look at the numbers. So I'm not sure I'm buying that. But again, how are you comparing the two? Like Tim Duncan being ahead of Shaq is arguably one of the weirdest things on this entire thing because they're in the same sport. I think Duncan was 16, Shaq was 17, or was 10 and 11. I can't read my handwriting either way. But having Duncan ahead of Shaq, no, I'm sorry. First of all, not a better athlete because you look at the size that Shaq was and what he was able to accomplish. You can't say that. And I'm sorry, wasn't as dominant a player as Shaquille O'Neal was. Not as high in the hierarchy of the NBA as Shaquille O'Neal was. I don't know how Tim Duncan, and he's quiet, so maybe he's disrespected by some, not by me, right? As good a four as we've ever seen, but he can't be ahead of Shaq. Those two, you can do apples to apples because they're both NBA players. That makes no sense to me. But I had to say one thing about a sport I love. And I'm not trying to get any Islanders in it if you're watching there over the shoulder here, if you're watching the podcast on YouTube or on X or on Facebook. But how we get 3 hockey players in here total, I don't know. Like, do we not know they're athletes? Sidney Crosby was at 22. And if you're looking at accolades and accomplishments, I'm not sure you could have 21 ahead of him, but he's at 22. Ovechkin, I didn't check the number because I want to get to the third one. Connor McDavid was at 98. Now, I understand Connor McDavid only been around a few years. So maybe this is based on accomplishments. He has not won a Stanley Cup, although quite an accomplishment tells you how good you are when you win the Conn Smythe, when you lose the Cup, when you lose the finals. But Connor McDavid at 98 is arguably in this 100. If you're not a hockey fan, I will tell you, remember this, put this in a capsule, and take this back out, and let's look at those less than 20 years, right? Because he's going to be the only hockey player that's in the top 20 then, if they do this list again. Anybody who's a hockey fan, I don't have to tell you. But the idea that Connor McDavid is 98 and that there are 97 athletes since 2000 who are better than him, and I don't care what sport it is a travesty. Because that dude is on the path to be the guy who could be associated with that, next tier after Gretzky, because he's in a category by himself. But if you got, Wayne Gretzky, you got Bobby Orr, right? Most people probably do it top 2. And then when you get into that Lemieux category with others, he's going to be, and Sidney certainly in that, Sidney Crosby, he's going to be ahead of that list. This guy's as talented a hockey player as we've ever seen. So I got to give some love. 3 hockey players, top 100, kind of crazy to me. And 97 ahead of Connor McDavid is just blasphemy. Sorry. Not sorry about this. We will have much more coming up this week. Second half of the baseball season begins. Guests on all 3 pods, all sorts of different stuff. Get to me. Give me your comments and thoughts on this podcast. Continue to listen. Please go YouTube channel right now. Unfiltered with Casey Stern. Go like and subscribe. Watch the videos. We got all kinds of content, all kinds of conversations from many different people, from the Dusty Bakers to the Rex Chapmans to all sorts of coaches and players and analysts. Oh my, go get it now. We now and always are presented here at Unfiltered by